A black man was arrested in the mall in front of his kids, but something unexpected happened. Keep watching to find out how this story unfolds. Before we begin, where are you watching our videos from? Drop your location in the comment. Let's begin. The day started like any other. Ken had promised his kids, Jaden and Layla, a trip to the mall, a little treat to make up for his long hours at work. It was a perfect Saturday afternoon. The sun was high, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon pretzels, and the mall was alive with families, friends, and laughter. Jaden, a wide-eyed 10-year-old with an encyclopedic knowledge of superheroes, had been looking forward to a stop at the comic book store. Layla, just 6, clutched her stuffed bunny and spoke excitedly about the ice cream flavors she'd try after exploring the toy store. Ken, in his usual calm demeanor, held their hands as they strolled through the crowded corridors. He loved these moments, simple, unhurried, full of their chatter. They stopped at the toy store, and the kids darted inside, marveling at action figures and stuffed animals. Ken stayed by the entrance, leaning against the wall with a contented smile. As he stood there, he noticed something unsettling. A pair of mall security guards stood a few feet away, their eyes fixed on him. Their expressions were hard to read, stern, perhaps even suspicious. Ken felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. He told himself it was nothing. People looked. It wasn't unusual. Yet there was an unmistakable chill in their gaze. He shifted uneasily, checked his phone, and forced himself to relax. "Daddy, look at this." Layla's voice broke his thoughts. She came bounding out of the store, holding a colorful doll. Ken chuckled and reached out to take her hand. But the moment shattered. 2 police officers suddenly appeared, rushing toward him with alarming speed. Shoppers turned to look as their voices cut through the noise of the mall. "Ken Carter, stop where you are." One officer barked, their tone commanding and loud enough to make heads turn. Ken froze, his heart racing. His mind struggled to process the scene unfolding. Layla gripped his hand tighter, her tiny fingers trembling. Jaden came running to his sister's side, his young face a mix of confusion and fear. "What's going on?" Ken asked, his voice calm but shaking at the edges. There must be some mistake. The officers didn't slow down. One grabbed his arm while the other reached for his wrist. Ken instinctively pulled back, his mind racing. Was this really happening? "Daddy, what's happening?" Layla's voice was small, scared. "Stay calm," Ken said, trying to reassure her, but his own fear was growing. "Officers, I think you have the wrong person. Hands behind your back," one of them shouted, ignoring his words. The other officer quickly pulled out handcuffs. "Wait, what's this about?" "My kids are here," Ken pleaded, gesturing toward Jaden and Layla, who now stood frozen, their eyes wide with terror. The cuffs snapped around his wrists, cold and unyielding. The roughness of their movements sent him stumbling. "Daddy," Layla cried out, tears streaming down her face. "Don't take my dad," Jaden yelled, his small frame positioning itself protectively in front of his sister. The scene was chaotic. Shoppers stopped to watch, some murmuring in confusion or pulling out their phones. The once lively mall now echoed with Layla's sobs and Jaden's shouts. Ken tried to speak again, to explain, to protest, but his words were swallowed by the tension. "Officers, please," he begged. "At least let me explain to my kids." "Enough," one officer snapped, hauling him toward the exit. Ken craned his neck to look back at his children, who were now surrounded by strangers trying to console them. "Stay with them," he shouted desperately to the nearest onlooker, a woman who appeared as shaken as he was. But the kid's cries grew fainter as the officers dragged him further away. "Daddy, don't go." Jaden's voice cracked as he screamed, trying to chase after him, only to be held back by a concerned bystander. Ken's heart shattered, his children's tear-streaked faces blurred as his own eyes welled up. Whatever this was, whatever mistake had been made, he knew it would scar them. The bustling mall seemed to move in slow motion, the weight of hundreds of eyes on him pressing like a stone in his chest. As he was led outside into the sharp November air, Ken's mind raced. What had just happened? And how would he make it right? Ken sat in the holding cell, his hands clenched into fists, his mind swirling with anger and despair. The cold metal bench beneath him felt like a distant echo of something he thought he'd left behind. It wasn't the first time. Years ago, in his early 20s, he'd been accused of a crime he didn't commit. He could still feel the heat of that day, the judgment in the officer's eyes, and the suffocating weight of being presumed guilty. Back then, he'd been walking home from work when the police stopped him, claiming he fit the description of a man who had robbed a convenience store. The description boiled down to one thing: he was black. Despite having no evidence, he was arrested, fingerprinted, and humiliated. For weeks, he fought to clear his name, eventually proving he'd been nowhere near the scene of the crime. The charges were dropped, but the scars remained. He learned then that his skin color was enough for some people to see him as a suspect. No matter how educated, polite, or well-dressed he was, to certain eyes, he would always be a threat. And now, sitting in this cell, the same story was playing out again. He felt the familiar cocktail of frustration and helplessness as an officer walked in, holding a clipboard. "Ken Carter," the officer said, his tone clipped. He glanced at Ken, his eyes narrowing as if he'd already decided what kind of man Ken was. "You're being accused of participating in a robbery that took place less than a mile from the mall." Ken blinked, stunned. "Robbery? You've got the wrong person. I was at the mall with my kids the whole time." "Ask them. Check the cameras." The officer shrugged, unconvinced. A witness described the suspect as a black man, late 30s, medium build, wearing a dark jacket. "Sound familiar?" Ken stared at him, disbelief coursing through his veins. "You just described half the men in this city." The officer didn't respond, scribbling something on his clipboard instead. "I'm telling you, I didn't do it," Ken continued, his voice steady but firm. "I was with my children. I don't know what else to say." The officer barely looked up. "You'll have your chance to explain yourself. In the meantime, we're processing you." Ken leaned back, feeling the weight of every injustice he'd ever faced pressed down on him. This wasn't about facts. It was about assumptions. Jaden paced the mall's tiled floor, his small hands clenched into fists. Layla sat on a bench nearby, her face buried in her stuffed bunny as she sobbed softly. Shoppers passed by, some glancing at the siblings with pity, others too busy to notice. Jaden felt a surge of determination. His dad didn't belong in handcuffs. He was the best person Jaden knew, kind, strong, and always teaching him to do the right thing. "Layla," he said softly, crouching in front of her, "we're going to fix this." Layla sniffled and looked up at him, her big eyes filled with fear. "How?" Jaden's mind raced. His dad always told him to be brave and smart, no matter what. He remembered Ken's voice. "When something feels wrong, think it through. There's always a way to make it right." He stood and scanned the crowd, replaying what had just happened. The police had said something about a robbery suspect. Jaden remembered the words clearly. A black man wearing a dark hoodie. His eyes darted around, looking for anything unusual. And then he saw him. A man in a dark hoodie stood near the entrance to the food court, nervously shifting his weight. Something about him felt off. He kept glancing around as if looking for someone, or avoiding being seen. Jaden grabbed Layla's hand. "Come on." They walked carefully toward the man, staying far enough away not to draw attention. As they got closer, Jaden saw something unexpected. The man dropped a wallet onto the floor. He didn't even seem to notice, or maybe he didn't care. He hurried toward the exit, his pace quickening. Jaden bent down and picked up the wallet. His heart pounded as he opened it. Inside was an ID card, some cash, and credit cards. One name stood out: Angela Dawson. Jaden's breath caught. That was the name the police had said over the loudspeakers, the victim of the robbery. Layla, he whispered urgently, clutching the wallet. I think this belongs to the person who got robbed. Layla's eyes widened. What do we do? Jaden thought fast. He couldn't let this man get away. But he wasn't about to put himself or his sister in danger. He glanced around and spotted a mall security guard near the escalators. Stay here, he told Layla, handing her the wallet. If anything happens, give this to a grown-up. I'll be right back. No, Layla cried, grabbing his arm. Don't leave me. Jaden hesitated, then nodded. Okay, let's both go. They ran toward the guard together. Jaden's voice was firm as he held up the wallet. Excuse me, sir. This belongs to the robbery victim. The guy who dropped it is getting away. The guard's eyes widened, and he immediately called for backup on his radio. Within moments, a group of security guards moved toward the exit where the man in the hoodie had disappeared. Jaden held Layla close as they watched the scene unfold. He didn't know if they'd caught the man yet, but he felt a flicker of hope. They had done something. They hadn't just stood by. Jaden whispered to his sister, Dad always says to do what's right, even when it's hard. I think we're going to help him. Layla nodded, her tears slowing. We're brave, just like Daddy. As the guards moved quickly toward the exit, Jaden squeezed Layla's hand. For the first time that day, he felt like they might be able to fix this. Jaden's heart pounded as he watched the man in the hoodie weave through the crowded mall. He tightened his grip on Layla's hand, whispering, Stay close, Layla. We have to follow him. Layla hesitated, fear flashing in her eyes. What if he sees us? Jaden knelt to her level, speaking softly but firmly. I know it's scary, but we have to help Dad. If we lose him, the police might not believe us. I'll keep you safe. I promise. Layla nodded, her small fingers clutching his tightly. Together, they trailed the man, staying a safe distance behind. The suspect turned a corner, heading toward a dimly lit stairwell. Jaden and Layla quickly ducked behind a pillar, their breaths shallow. Peeking out, Jaden saw the man pause at the stairwell door. He pulled off his hoodie, revealing a shaved head and a small tattoo on his wrist, a jagged lightning bolt. The man stuffed the hoodie into his backpack and disappeared into the stairwell. Jaden's mind raced. I need to tell someone, but we can't lose him. Are you two okay? The voice startled Jaden. He spun around to see a kind-looking woman, probably in her 40s, with concern etched on her face. She crouched down to their level. You look scared. What's wrong? Jaden hesitated, unsure if he could trust her. But then he remembered his dad's advice. Sometimes you have to trust others to do the right thing. My dad's in trouble, Jaden blurted. That man, he pointed toward the stairwell. He did something bad, and the police think my dad did it instead. We have to stop him. The woman's eyes widened as she listened. She glanced toward the stairwell, then back at the kids. Okay, she said, her voice steady. Let's get security involved. But I'm coming with you to make sure you're safe. She pulled out her phone and quickly called mall security, explaining the situation. There's a man acting suspiciously near the stairwell, she said. 2 kids saw him drop a wallet from the robbery earlier. Send someone now. Jaden felt a surge of relief, but also urgency. We have to move before he gets away, he urged. The woman nodded. Stay close to me. We'll make sure he doesn't get far. They followed the stairwell, emerging into a side corridor near a service door. Jaden's heart thudded as he spotted the man again, this time fiddling with the door's handle, trying to leave unnoticed. There he is, Jaden whispered to the woman. Just then, 2 mall security guards appeared at the far end of the hallway, moving quickly but quietly. One of them gestured for the group to stay back. Jaden's hands balled into fists as the tension mounted. The man finally got the door open and stepped outside, only to come face to face with another security guard waiting on the other side. "Sir, we need to speak with you," the guard said, blocking his path. The man froze, his eyes darting around for an escape. "What's this about? I didn't do anything." Jaden couldn't hold back any longer. "That's him," he shouted, stepping out from behind the pillar. He dropped the wallet from the robbery. The man's face darkened, his voice rising. "I don't know what you're talking about. These kids are lying." But the guards were already moving in. "Sir, we're going to have to search your belongings," one said firmly. The man protested, but it was no use. When the guards opened his backpack, they found stolen jewelry wrapped in a cloth, along with Angela Dawson's ID and several credit cards. The evidence was irrefutable. The man's shoulders slumped as the guards cuffed him. "This is a misunderstanding," he shouted, but his voice lacked conviction. Jaden let out a shaky breath, clutching Layla's hand as tears welled in his eyes. They had done it. At the police station, Ken sat in the cold, gray cell, staring at the floor. Hours felt like days. His mind kept going to Jaden and Layla, wondering if they were safe, if they were scared, if they even understood what was happening. "What if I don't get out?" The thought clawed at him. He'd seen too many stories of innocent men losing everything because no one believed them. The sound of footsteps snapped him out of his thoughts. A guard appeared, unlocking the cell door. "You're free to go," the guard said gruffly. Ken stared at him, confused. "What? Why?" "We caught the real guy. Some kids and a witness helped identify him." Ken felt his chest tighten, his mind racing. "My kids, where are they?" "They're safe," the guard reassured him. "They're on their way here now." Ken barely heard the rest. He rushed out of the cell, his legs unsteady but driven by a single thought. "I need to see my kids." As he entered the waiting area, he saw them, Jaden and Layla, sitting close together on a bench, their eyes lighting up the moment they spotted him. "Daddy," Layla cried, running to him with open arms. Ken scooped her up, holding her tightly as tears streamed down his face. Jaden followed, his small hands clutching his father's jacket as he hugged him fiercely. "You did it," Ken whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You're both so brave." Jaden looked up at him, his face serious but proud. "We knew you didn't do it, Dad. We had to help." Ken hugged them both, overwhelmed with gratitude and love. In that moment, he knew that no matter what challenges they faced, their bond as a family would always carry them through. Ken burst into the mall, his eyes scanning frantically for Jaden and Layla. His chest heaved with emotion, relief, anger, and a lingering ache of humiliation. Then he saw them. Near a cluster of mall security guards, Jaden stood tall, his hand resting protectively on Layla's shoulder. "Daddy." Layla's voice pierced the air as she broke free from the group, running straight into his arms. Ken dropped to his knees, catching her and holding her tightly as she sobbed into his chest. Her small body shook with the kind of fear no child should ever have to feel. "It's okay, baby," Ken whispered, kissing the top of her head. "I'm here. I'm here." Jaden approached more slowly, his expression a mix of pride and lingering fear. "We found the guy, Dad," he said, his voice steady despite everything he'd been through. "We knew you didn't do it." Ken looked at his son, his eyes brimming with tears. He pulled Jaden into the hug, squeezing them both tightly. "You're my heroes," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know what I'd do without you." A moment later, 2 police officers approached, their expressions uncomfortable. Ken stood, still holding Layla, and faced them. "Mr. Carter," one of the officers began, his voice stiff but apologetic, "we owe you an apology. We apprehended the real suspect. Your children were instrumental in helping us find him." Ken felt a bitter laugh rise in his throat. He glanced at Jaden, who stood silently by his side, and then back at the officers. "You didn't listen to me," Ken said, his voice trembling with barely contained anger. "I told you I was with my kids the whole time, and you didn't even care. You handcuffed me in front of them." The apologetic officer looked down, shame crossing his face. The other officer, however, bristled defensively. We were acting on a witness description. These situations aren't always clear. Ken cut him off, his tone sharp. It was clear to me. I'm a father, trying to protect my children, and you didn't even stop to think what that would do to them. To me. The defensive officer opened his mouth to respond, but Ken had already turned his back. He couldn't waste another second arguing. His children were what mattered now. Holding Layla close and keeping a hand on Jaden's shoulder, he walked away from the officers and out of the mall. That night, the house was quiet. Layla had finally stopped crying, and Jaden had relaxed enough to talk about his favorite superheroes again. Ken tucked them both into bed, taking extra time with each of them. Sitting beside Layla, he smoothed her hair as she clutched her stuffed bunny. You were so brave today, sweetheart, he said softly. I'm so proud of you. Are the bad guys gone? She asked, her voice small. Ken nodded. They're gone, and they won't hurt anyone else. She seemed satisfied with that, her eyelids growing heavy. Ken kissed her forehead and turned to Jaden's room. Jaden was sitting up, his arms crossed over his knees. He looked older somehow, as if the day had added years to his young face. Ken sat on the edge of the bed. Jaden, he began, his voice thick with emotion. You were smarter and braver than I ever could have imagined. You protected your sister. You stood up for me. I can't tell you how proud I am. Jaden shifted, looking down. I just did what you always told me to do, Dad. Be brave and do what's right. Ken smiled, blinking back tears. And you did it better than I ever could. You're amazing, son. Jaden leaned into his father's embrace, and Ken held him close. Later, Ken stood in the doorway of Jaden and Layla's shared room, watching them sleep. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow on their peaceful faces. The day had been a nightmare, but it had also been a revelation. His children had shown courage and determination that humbled him. But as he watched them sleep, he felt the weight of the injustice he faced settle heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't just about him anymore. The fear and humiliation he had felt today, the injustice of being judged and condemned before being heard, was something he'd endured his entire life. But now, it had touched his children. That was unacceptable. Ken clenched his fists, a spark of resolve igniting in his chest. He couldn't change the past, but he could fight for the future, not just for Jaden and Layla, but for every child growing up in a world where people like their father were too often assumed guilty. He didn't know exactly how he would do it yet. Maybe it would mean speaking out, maybe it would mean joining local efforts for justice reform, or maybe it would mean simply teaching his children how to demand better from the world. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to let today's events define him, or them. As Ken stepped away from the doorway, the camera of life panned out, revealing the small but strong family at the center of the frame. Together, they had faced something terrible and come out stronger. And together, they would fight for a better world.